modern humans, you, me, everyone alive today, have existed for roughly 300,000 years. That already feels like a long time. Now imagine a species that survived nearly 2 million years, not thousands. Millions. A species that outlasted us by a factor of 6, that walked upright before fire was tamed, that crossed 3 continents on foot when the world looked nothing like it does now. Glaciers where there are none today. Land bridges where there are now oceans. Entire ecosystems that no longer exist. They were called Homo erectus, and unlike most extinct species you'll ever hear about, we don't have to imagine what they looked like or guess at how they lived. We have their bones. We have their tools. We have the fire pits they built and the footprints they left. Their existence isn't speculation. It's one of the most thoroughly documented chapters in the entire fossil record. And they still, eventually, went extinct. Because if the single most successful human species that ever existed could still disappear, the question worth sitting with is, what makes us think we're any different? If stories like this pull you in, hit subscribe. We cover the deep past every week. And if this hooked you already, drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Okay, let's get into it. Around 1.9 million years ago, in what is now East Africa, something changed. A new hominin species emerged with a body plan unlike anything that came before it. A fully upright gait, longer legs, a narrower waist, and a body built not for climbing trees, but for walking, and walking far. Homo erectus was the first human species to evolve a genuinely human-like body. The silhouette that, if you saw it walking toward you from a distance today, you might mistake for one of us. And we don't have to speculate about this. We know it directly because of one of the most important fossil discoveries in the history of human evolution. In August of 1984, on the western shore of Lake Turkana in Kenya, a fossil hunter named Kamoya Kimeo spotted a small, dark fragment of bone eroding out of a hillside. That fragment led to the excavation of what remains, to this day, the most complete early human skeleton ever found. Scientists call him Turkana Boy, sometimes Narioka Tome Boy, after the nearby village. He was a boy of roughly 8 or 9 years old at the time of his death, based on microscopic analysis of his tooth growth patterns, and he lived approximately 1.5 to 1.6 million years ago. What makes Turkana Boy so extraordinary isn't just his age or his completeness. It's what his skeleton reveals. His pelvis was narrower than a modern human's, built for efficient, energy-saving bipedal walking. His chest was barrel-shaped. His limb proportions were, in almost every meaningful way, strikingly close to our own. Researchers studying his skeleton have concluded that Homo erectus walked and ran essentially the way we do today. Not the shuffling, ape-like gait often imagined for early humans, but genuine, efficient, long-distance locomotion. And that mattered enormously, because within a relatively short span of evolutionary time, this species did something no hominin before it had managed. It walked out of Africa. Fossil evidence places Homo erectus in the Republic of Georgia at a site called Dmanisi by around 1.8 million years ago, making it one of the earliest confirmed human presences outside Africa anywhere in the world. From there, the species continued spreading. 2 incisors found near Yuanmu in southern China have been dated to roughly 1.7 million years ago. A cranium from Lantian, also in China, dates to approximately 1.6 million years ago. Fossils and stone tools from the Indonesian island of Java, more on that discovery shortly, push the presence of Homo erectus in Southeast Asia back to roughly 1.7 million years ago as well. And by around 1.2 million years ago, at a site called Atapuerca in Spain, Homo erectus had reached Western Europe. This wasn't a single lucky migration. It was a sustained, repeated expansion across 3 continents, through wildly different climates, terrains, and ecosystems, accomplished entirely on foot, without maps, without domesticated animals, without any of the tools modern humans would consider basic necessities for long-distance travel. No prior human ancestor had come close to this kind of range. The very first scientific proof that Homo erectus existed at all came decades before Turkana Boy, in a discovery that reads almost like an adventure story. In 1891, a Dutch anatomist and geologist named Eugène Dubois was excavating along the banks of the Solo River near the village of Trinil on the Indonesian island of Java. Dubois had a theory, unconventional and widely doubted at the time, that the missing link between apes and modern humans would be found somewhere in Southeast Asia, not Africa or Europe, where most of his contemporaries were searching. What Dubois found seemed to confirm exactly that theory. Along the riverbank, his team uncovered a skull cap, a calotte, along with, separately, a thigh bone that looked strikingly modern in its shape and proportions. Dubois initially named his discovery Pithecanthropus erectus, meaning ape man who walked upright. The scientific world of the 1890s was deeply skeptical. Many researchers dismissed the fossils outright, insisting the skull cap belonged to some kind of giant ape, and the leg bone belonged to an unrelated modern human, the 2 fossils simply having washed up together by coincidence. It would take decades, and a great deal more evidence, before the scientific community came around. In the mid-1930s, a paleontologist named Gustav Heinrich Ralph von Königswald began a systematic search across Java and recovered additional fossil remains that closely matched Dubois' original find, reinforcing and ultimately validating what Dubois had proposed nearly 50 years earlier. What we now call Java man belongs to Homo erectus, and it remains one of the species' most important and earliest discovered fossil populations. Java man's estimated brain capacity falls somewhere between 775 and 975 cubic centimeters, smaller than a modern human's average of roughly 1,350 to 1,500 cubic centimeters, but significantly larger than any ape, and a clear evolutionary step toward the brains we carry today. Homo erectus fossils would go on to be found across Java for the next century, at sites including Sangiran and Trinil, spanning an extraordinary range of time, from roughly 1.6 million years ago to as recently as, by some estimates, around 250,000 years ago. That means a single fossil-bearing region documents Homo erectus's presence for well over 1 million continuous years. And Java wasn't the only major discovery site. In the 1920s and 1930s, roughly 200 Homo erectus fossils, representing more than 40 individuals, were unearthed at a site called Zhoukoudian near Beijing, China, a population that became known as Peking man. Together, Java man and Peking man gave 20th century scientists something they had never had before: physical, datable, repeatedly confirmed proof that an entire species of upright walking, tool-using, geographically widespread humans had existed for a length of time almost impossible to comprehend. This is what makes Homo erectus different from almost any other ancient creature this channel has ever covered. We're not reconstructing this species from a single skull fragment or a handful of scattered teeth. We have hundreds of individuals, spanning 3 continents and well over 1 million years, cross-validated by multiple independent research teams working decades apart. Walking out of Africa and surviving across 3 continents required more than just the right body. It required the right tools, and Homo erectus is credited with one of the most important technological leaps in the entire story of human evolution. The earliest members of the broader early Homo lineage used what archaeologists call Oldowan tools, simple sharpened rock flakes, effective but crude, essentially just stones struck to produce a usable cutting edge. Homo erectus changed that entirely. By around 1.76 million years ago, the archaeological record shows the emergence of what's known as the Acheulean tool industry. Large, deliberately shaped cutting tools, including hand axes and cleavers, carefully worked on both sides to produce a sharp, symmetrical edge. This was the first known human technology to require genuine forward planning. Making an Acheulean hand axe wasn't a single lucky strike. It demanded selecting the right raw stone, visualizing the finished shape before beginning, and executing a controlled, multi-step knapping sequence to get there. Researchers studying the differences between Acheulean hand axes across different populations have noted something else striking. Many of the differences between regional tool styles don't appear to reflect functional necessity. In other words, Homo erectus groups may have developed distinct tool-making traditions, recognizable, identifiable styles, passed down and taught within specific communities. That's not just survival technology. That's the earliest known evidence of something resembling culture. These tools mattered enormously for one very practical reason: butchery. Fractured and cut-marked animal bones found alongside Homo erectus remains across multiple sites indicate that this species regularly accessed meat, likely through a combination of hunting and scavenging, from at least 1.75 million years ago onward. Increased access to calorie-dense meat is widely believed by researchers to be connected to another defining trend across the Homo erectus timeline: steadily increasing brain size. Larger brains are extraordinarily expensive, energetically speaking. They demand far more calories to build and maintain than most other tissue in the body. A more reliable, higher quality diet, made accessible through tool use and eventually fire, may have been the resource that allowed brain growth to become evolutionarily sustainable in the first place. The reach of Acheulean technology mirrors the reach of the species itself. It appears in East Africa by 1.6 million years ago, reaches Europe by at least 500,000 years ago, and possibly as early as 900,000 years ago, and has now been documented at more than 24 sites across southern China, dating back roughly 800,000 years. Wherever Homo erectus went, this technology went with them, refined, taught, and carried across generations and continents. If tool use explains how Homo erectus could process food and defend itself, fire explains how this species could survive in places that should have been completely unlivable for a primate, with no fur, no claws, and no natural defense against cold. Homo erectus is widely credited as the first human species to control fire, and the evidence for this claim has only gotten stronger and older in recent years. For decades, the earliest solid evidence of hominin fire use came from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa's Kalahari Desert, dated to roughly 1 million years ago. But newer analysis, published in 2026, examined burned bone fragments from a deeper layer of that same cave and pushed the evidence back even further, suggesting Homo erectus may have been using fire in that location as far back as 1.8 million years ago, nearly doubling the previously accepted timeline. Other significant fire evidence comes from Shihudu in China's Shanxi province, where burnt material has been dated to approximately 1.27 million years ago, and from Kisum Cave in Israel, where large quantities of burnt bone, heated soil, and ash deposits point to fire being used on a regular, sustained basis by at least 300,000 years ago. By around 400,000 years ago, still well within Homo erectus's existence, the archaeological record shows unmistakable evidence of deliberate, organized fire use. Hearths appear inside caves and shelters, serving multiple purposes simultaneously: cooking food, providing warmth through cold nights and glacial winters, offering protection from nocturnal predators, and very likely functioning as gathering points for social interaction, the ancient equivalent of a fireside conversation. The consequences of mastering fire went far beyond comfort. There's little doubt among researchers that fire was a critical factor, enabling Homo erectus to colonize genuinely cold, often glaciated regions of prehistoric Europe, environments that would otherwise have been completely off-limits to a species without thick fur or specialized cold-weather physiology. And cooking food changed the species' anatomy over time. Cooked food requires dramatically less chewing, tearing, and grinding than raw food, which gradually reduced the evolutionary pressure favoring large, powerful teeth and heavy jaw muscles. One of several anatomical shifts that, over hundreds of thousands of years, moved the human lineage further from our ape-like ancestors and closer to the proportions we recognize in ourselves today. Some researchers studying the cognitive dimension of this shift go even further, arguing that fire's greatest impact wasn't physical at all, it was mental. The demands of tending, maintaining, and strategically using fire may have helped drive the development of long-term memory, planning, and problem-solving in the evolving human brain, since fire is not a resource you can use carelessly. It has to be managed, protected, and planned around. Perhaps the most surprising evidence about Homo erectus doesn't concern their tools or their travel. It concerns how they treated one another. Fossil evidence recovered from multiple Homo erectus sites shows individuals who survived significant injury or illness for extended periods after the initial trauma, a finding that would only be possible if other members of the group were actively caring for them. An individual unable to hunt, gather, or defend themselves due to injury or advanced age would not survive long in a harsh Pleistocene environment without assistance. The presence of healed, long-survived pathologies in the fossil record is widely interpreted by researchers as direct evidence that Homo erectus cared for its old and weak members, rather than abandoning them. Turkana Boy himself adds an unexpected layer to this picture. Detailed study of his vertebrae revealed evidence of a spinal pathology, a physical disability that would have affected his movement and mobility. His survival to the age of 8 or 9, despite this condition, is itself a small but meaningful data point, suggesting some degree of social support within his group, though researchers continue to debate exactly how this specific case should be interpreted, given his young age. This matters because it reframes what kind of species Homo erectus actually was. This wasn't simply a physically capable, technologically competent animal, surviving through brute adaptability alone. There's a growing body of evidence suggesting genuine social cooperation, group living, shared parental care, and coordinated foraging strategies that would have required real communication and trust between individuals. Survival across 3 continents and nearly 2 million years wasn't achieved by isolated individuals. It was achieved by groups who looked out for one another. To understand just how staggering Homo erectus's timeline actually is, it helps to put it side by side with our own. Homo sapiens, us, have existed for approximately 300,000 years. Homo erectus existed for close to 2 million, with the earliest fossils dated to roughly 1.9 million years ago. That means, depending on which end estimates you use, this single species survived somewhere between 5 and 6 times longer than our entire existence as a species so far, combined. During that span, Homo erectus endured multiple ice ages, dramatic and repeated shifts in climate, changing coastlines, and environments that transformed again and again beneath their feet, sometimes within a single population's lifetime, across generations. Populations adapted to cold European winters at Atapuerca, tropical Southeast Asian islands across Java, the open plains and rift valleys of East Africa, and the temperate river valleys of northern China, all under the umbrella of the same species, carrying the same basic toolkit and, very likely, the same fundamental social structures. Some researchers have gone even further, proposing that certain Homo erectus populations may have constructed basic rafts capable of crossing open water to reach islands like Flores in Indonesia, a claim that remains genuinely controversial and debated within the field, but one that hints at a level of resourcefulness and problem-solving that continues to surprise researchers more than a century after Dubois' first discovery. By nearly every measure available to paleoanthropologists, Homo erectus wasn't just successful. It was, for close to 2 million years, the most successful and longest-lived human experiment the planet had ever produced. And by a wide margin, it remains the longest surviving human species we know of to this day. So what happened to a species this dominant, this adaptable, this thoroughly proven across nearly 2 million years? The honest answer is that Homo erectus didn't vanish in a single dramatic event. There was no asteroid, no sudden catastrophe visible in the fossil or geological record. Their disappearance, where it genuinely occurred, was gradual, uneven across different regions, and driven by more than one cause layered on top of each other. Some of the very latest surviving populations, particularly in parts of Southeast Asia, appear to have persisted until surprisingly recently. Fossils attributed to a late surviving form, sometimes classified as Homo erectus soloensis, found in Java, have been estimated by different research teams to date to somewhere between roughly 550,000 years ago at the earliest interpretation, and as recently as around 108,000 to 143,000 years ago at the latest, meaning Homo erectus, or something very close to it, may have shared the planet with early Homo sapiens for a genuinely meaningful stretch of overlapping time, rather than disappearing long before we ever arrived. Part of what makes the extinction of Homo erectus complicated to define is that, in a very real evolutionary sense, this species never fully vanished. Certain populations of Homo erectus are understood by researchers to have gradually evolved into other human species over time, including Homo heidelbergensis, a species considered by many paleoanthropologists to represent the last common ancestor shared by modern humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans. In that framework, Homo erectus is sometimes described by researchers as a chronospecies, a lineage that didn't so much go extinct as continuously transform into its own descendants, generation after generation, until the population at one end of that timeline looked different enough from the population at the other end to warrant a new name. In that specific sense, Homo erectus's extinction is, as some researchers put it, more a matter of taxonomic convention than a true biological ending. But other, more geographically isolated populations, particularly those on remote islands, cut off from the wider gene pool and unable to interbreed with or evolve alongside neighboring groups, appear to have genuinely ended as distinct lineages, rather than transforming into something else. For these populations, the most likely explanation is a combination of factors: shrinking, less stable environments, as climate patterns shifted repeatedly over hundreds of thousands of years, increasingly limited access to the resources their toolkit and body plan had originally evolved around, and eventually, growing competition with newer, more cognitively flexible human species emerging and expanding around them, including early Homo sapiens. The very adaptability that had defined Homo erectus for nearly 2 million years, the trait that let this species outsurvive every other human lineage in history, eventually met its limit against competitors that could adapt even faster, plan even further ahead, and cooperate in even more complex ways. There's a temptation telling a story like this, to treat Homo erectus's eventual disappearance as some kind of failure, proof that even the greatest survivors eventually lose. But that framing misses what the evidence actually shows. Nearly 2 million years is not a story of failure. It's arguably the single greatest survival record any human species has ever achieved, full stop. And it's one built entirely on adaptability rather than raw strength or aggression. Homo erectus didn't dominate through size or ferocity. They dominated through flexibility, a body built for long-distance movement, tools that could be reshaped for new environments, fire that could turn any climate survivable, and social bonds strong enough to carry injured or aging members through hardship that would have killed a solitary animal. What ended, region by region, wasn't strength. It was the specific configuration of skills, environment, and competition that had worked for a given population for hundreds of thousands of years, until conditions shifted enough, or competitors arrived capable enough, that the old configuration no longer held. And even then, in many populations, ending wasn't really an ending. It was a slow transformation into the very species now telling this story. This is, in a very real sense, our own origin story, as much as it is a story about extinction. Every measure of Homo erectus's success, the walking, the tool use, the fire, the social cooperation, the sheer geographic reach, represents the foundation that later human evolution built directly on top of. We didn't simply outlast Homo erectus. In a meaningful sense, parts of us are Homo erectus, carried forward through nearly 2 million years of trial, adaptation, and change. For nearly 2 million years, Homo erectus was the most successful human species this planet had ever seen. The first to walk like us, the first to master fire, the first to shape tools with genuine forethought, the first to care for their sick and their old, and the first to leave Africa and claim 3 continents as home. We know this not through guesswork, but through hundreds of fossils, from a riverbank in Java to a cave in South Africa to a lakeshore in Kenya, each one independently confirming a story too consistent, too widespread, and too thoroughly documented to be anything other than exactly what it appears to be. Proof of a species that thrived, adapted, and endured longer than any human species before or since. And it still, in most of the places it once called home, eventually came to an end. Some of them became us. Others simply ran out of time, in a changing world that eventually outpaced even the most adaptable species to ever walk upright. Homo sapiens have been here for 300,000 years. Homo erectus made it to nearly 2 million. The real question this story leaves behind isn't how they lasted so long. It's whether we will.